Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 25 of the Great Divorce Podcast. Our guest today is Brian Portnoy. Brian is one of the world's leading experts on the psychology of money. He's written multiple best-selling books, including The Geometry of Wealth and The Investor's Paradox, and has more than 20 years' experience as an investor and educator. He earned his PhD at the University of Chicago, where he lives. Brian is the founder of Shaping Wealth, a learning platform dedicated to improving the human experience of money. Shaping Wealth works with financial advisors and their clients, employers, and other organizations to inspire better financial decision-making and a healthier relationship with money. Today, we're going to chat with Brian about the key themes in his book, The Geometry of Wealth: How to Shape a Life of Money and Meaning. Brian, welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast.
Andrew, great to talk to you.
Nice. I really enjoyed your book, The Geometry of Wealth. In it, you make an important distinction between rich and wealthy. Would you share with our audience how you perceive that distinction?
Sure. And I don't think it's just a semantic one. I think it's one that has material life consequences. To me, the definition of rich is basically the quest for more. You know, you have $1 million and you want to get it to 2 million. You have 2 million, you want to get to 4 million, and so on and so on. And so the quest for more, which we're hardwired for as human beings, it's not a bad thing. It's a human thing. It has complicated relationship with how we feel about our lives, but we can get into that later. So rich is a quest for more. Wealthy is what I think we all want to be, more so than rich. And I use the term funded contentment to capture this notion of being wealthy. And that is the ability to underwrite a life that is meaningful to you. So rich, a quest for more, which is often, in fact, usually unsatisfying. Wealthy should be a sense of, or a state of deep contentment, if we can attach what's meaningful in our lives to our financial lives.
You use the term funded contentment. That's a curious phrase. By funding, you mean money, contentment, happiness. Means different things to different people, no?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, there's this thing called the human condition. There's nothing particularly unique or special about either of us or anybody else listening to this podcast. We're all more or less wired the same. The question of what is happiness is both very complicated and not particularly complicated. If you go into the thesaurus, there's 30 or 40 different synonyms for happiness. If you go to the wiki page for happiness, I think there's like 3,000. There's thousands of entries and thousands of editors. So, what is happiness? What does it mean to be happy? How do we become happy? I mean, this takes us back to Greek philosophers, Aristotle, and even before that. The fact is, though, there's sort of two notions of happiness that define our lives. It's what I call, and a lot of people who do research in this area, called experienced happiness versus reflective happiness. So experienced happiness is the day-to-day good mood, things are going well. Yeah, you're having a nice day, having a nice moment. You're happy. It's fleeting, it comes and goes, is what it is. Reflective happiness requires us to turn on our brains a little bit and ask questions. Hey, how's my life going? Am I leading a good life? Am I leading the life that I had hoped to? It's a moment of reflection. That deeper sense of what Aristotle called eudaimonia is what I'm capturing in this concept of funded contentment. Money has a relatively limited relationship with our day-to-day happiness, but you can find ways to attach it to that deeper sense of meaning that we all want in our life.
It's important, particularly for our audience who are largely people going through divorce or emerge from divorce later in life, because many of our audience may despair that, having seen their net worth cut in half just as retirement was approaching or even into it, that your distinction and the distinction of others who speak about this between rich and wealthy really has the potential to resonate, because a lot, and I can speak from personal experience, having gone through a mid-late life divorce, that our audience may tend to be a little bit more reflective, not always, but they may, and be honest with themselves about their lives and what's led them to this particular point in their lives. And being older, they, if not wisdom, then perhaps experience.
Mm-hmm.
And also, of course, there's the demographic issue of having less time to live. So I think we need to ask ourselves hard questions. It's because people always talk about, what makes you happy. I think a lot of people aren't sure what makes them happy, or don't give the thought to the reflective angle. And I know your book incorporates a lot of the concepts of positive psychology, and you use a concept of the 4 C's as components of funded contentment. Could you maybe speak to us a little bit about how the 4 C's maybe relates to the work that we need to do with ourselves in order to determine what funded contentment may mean to us?
Yeah, absolutely. So you referred to positive psychology. For those who are listening who don't know what that is, you could just think of it as the science of happiness. There's lots of different branches of psychology. Some speak to our evolutionary roots, some speak to how our brains work, and there's a whole now huge field. I mean, it was invented about 35 years ago, but it's a huge field of positive psychology that really looks at the underlying sources of a life well lived. So in the way that I write about it, based on, just being around the world for about half a century and having some good days and some bad days, but also, understanding the science, appreciating literature and theology, my model for a life well lived for contentment has 4 parts. What I call the 4 C's, alliteration that, or a mnemonic that people can remember relatively easily. And so the 4 C's are connection, control, competence, and context. And we can dive into any of these, but I'll summarize them quickly by saying that, connection is, as it says, our connection to others, our social relationships. We are born tribal, small t tribal, not today's capital T political tribal, but we are group oriented, and we gain not only safety, but also identity and meaning from the groups that we associate with. So one deep source of contentment in life is the richness of the connections that we have to others. On the other side of the coin, control, we like to be loyal to the group, but we also want to do our own thing. We want autonomy. We want a sense of belonging, but then we also want a sense of autonomy, the ability to do whatever we want in life, freedom, independence, liberty. These are good things. The 3rd C is competence, which refers to what we do for a living. You go to a party and people say, hey, what do you do? Like, spoiler alert, they don't really care what you do. What they're trying to do is trying to get a sense of your identity, where are you coming from? Work, broadly speaking, not just what we do in the office from 9 to 5, but our vocation, our hobbies, our skills, those talents and passions. Those are a deep source of meaning in our day-to-day lives. And then fourth C is context, which is a kind of a broad catch-all. But this basically speaks to the very powerful, I think, evidenced notion that when we believe that we are living for something well beyond ourselves, we tend to be happier, to have more meaningful lives, happier in the reflective happiness sense. Historically, that broader context tends to land in one of two places. One is faith, the other is place. So whether it's religion or spirituality or some sense of just being connected to the cosmos, that's obviously through all of human history, something that's very important. And then place is also hugely important. Our hometown pride, our patriotism, our love of nation, these are things that are deeply meaningful to us. So stepping back up to, a mile high view, when we are evaluating, and this is, by the way, Andrew, we haven't gotten to money yet at all. But the important first step here is to have a functioning framework or mental model for thinking about what in life is really meaningful to us. The 4 C's are what's really meaningful to us: connection, control, competence, and context.
Well, precisely. And of course, what good is money if it's not funding these things that are, important to the core of yourself as a human being? And maybe the financial services industry does it the other way around, or the wrong way around, and focuses on the number first. But I'm fascinated by your construct of the 4 C's, because, I think when you mentioned connection, I thought of the Harvard study of adult development, which I believe started in the 30s with 700 men and has continued up until this time. I think maybe 40 or 50 of the original participants are still alive. And that study conclusively showed that what matters more than money, more than even diet and fitness, is the quality of the relationships in our lives and the connection. So I think, your point of connection certainly is in line with what they've been discussing at Harvard.
Yeah, and that study, and so that's the longest study in history, a continuous study in history on kind of the sources of human flourishing. And yeah, you're right to say that they present a lot of evidence that what's most important to us is the connections that we build and maintain over time. I mean, they're hardly the first people. I mean, this has been a point that's been understood for millennia. But they bring evidence to bear that's unique and powerful. And yeah, bottom line for them is, if you have rich social ties, you have the opportunity to lead a very good life.
You talk also about competence. When I was going, or I still am going through my journey, I came across a tool, the VIA Strengths Survey and Classification. And it seems to me that when you talk about competence in work and being good at something you care about, that's an element of this more profound view of happiness, when you're exercising your strengths to do your work. You feel like you're in the right place and you're doing the right thing. And
yeah,
then,
there's a term for that from positive psychology, which is flow.
Right.
Yeah.
Mihaly I can't pronounce his name.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Okay.
For anyone listening, there's about 29 letters in there. I couldn't begin to try to spell it. But he did a lot of the pioneering work on this idea of flow, and people will appreciate that, you are working on something at the office, home office, or, old school office. You're engaged in a hobby or some sort of activity, and you look up and you realize an hour or two has passed.
Right.
And basically time has stopped. That's what's known as a flow state. It's a particular neurological condition. It's a very good thing. We rarely feel better than when we find flow. Sometimes, actually much of the time, it's hard to find flow. But when I talk about competence as one of the four deep sources of a meaningful life, the tip of the spear of that experience is those sorts of flow states, and appreciating, being self-aware of the types of things that spark those moments or episodes of flow, and trying to do more of them.
No, exactly. And I'm curious. You mentioned it. When do you find yourself in a flow state, if you don't mind giving us
Writing. um, Writing is a very happy place for me. And let's continue to interrogate this notion of happiness. Like, I'm miserable half the time that I'm writing. Every serious writer writes to figure out what he or she thinks. No good writer has all of their thoughts formed and then you're just basically writing them down.
right.
No, I mean, the process is, you know, crawling on broken glass. But I kind of cherish those moments. And I run a business now and don't have the time like I used to write like I used to. But that is, there's other examples, but the one that I think is, easiest for me to talk about is writing.
Well, that certainly resonates with me as well. I think music's another thing, but with writing, I'm glad you pointed out, because people seem to think people pick an inspiration out of the sky. But writing is a laborious process, and the creativity comes in the doing. It's actually sitting down and doing the work that will prompt the moments of inspiration. And it's much more akin to digging a ditch than it is some of the more ephemeral ideas people might have about the writing process.
Yeah, I think generally, Andrew, the things that really matter to us are not necessarily easy. That there is deep value in the struggle, even the suffering that's involved with doing those things. So, if you're a musician and you're, learning your instruments, there's a lot of moments of frustration there.
And bleeding
But
fingers. Yeah.
yeah, bleeding fingers. It's a nice image. It's a nice metaphor for what anybody in any walk of life experiences when they really put their back and heart into something that matters to them. And, again, it could be at the workplace in terms of the tasks that you do. You love reading or analyzing or writing or building relationships or things like that. Or, these other hobbies or vocations. You're a painter, a sculptor, a musician, a writer. Sports. I mean, think about just losing yourself in the game. You're running full court hoops, or you play ultimate frisbee or pickleball or whatever it is. But like, boom, an hour or three has gone by and you've given your brain a rest because you're not thinking about anything, which is lovely.
No, it's right. And I think the key component is losing track of time. I remember in the mid 90s, I was at a film school in New York, and I was in the editing room, and didn't have a cell phone, and I didn't have a watch. And I think I went in at 6 o'clock to edit this short 3-minute movie that I'd shot. And I became so engrossed in it, before I knew it, it was midnight and 6 hours had passed, and I don't know where the time had gone. But I think I see that as akin to a flow state, and certainly encourage people, to consider, to do that sort of reflection, to think what a flow state might be for them. You mentioned an important component of one of your C's is context and being part of something bigger. I rarely. You mentioned the negative side of, or the negative interpretation of tribalism. I rarely see happy people. I rarely see a happy misanthrope. I rarely see a happy person who's so tied into sort of the tribalism that they just disdain half the population or more. And I think what you're trying to say with context, because it comes up in your book, I think you quote Jonathan Haidt, and you say other people matter, and other people matter to our happiness. And I ascribe, there's a term helper's high, but could you speak a little bit about the terms of relations with others and kind of getting out of your head as part of the contentment that you talk about?
Yeah, so I don't want to conflate terms because we're covering both context and connection here. When John Haidt, who's a popular, very a fantastic social psychologist, when he says that other people matter, that's a function of connection, and it's there's a bit of a misconception among some that we're sort of born into the world as these sort of individuals who are sovereign and a blank slate, and are born with nothing but liberty and freedom, and to some extent we are. The fact is that we are genetically wired from birth to be connected to others, that the development of our brains and everything else is tied to the nature and richness of the connection that we have. So when Haidt says that other people matter, it's just not, hey, we like having friends, or it's good to pal around with people. It's that our very development as a human being is a function of the other human beings that we interact with from the moment we are born. Context is, and these terms aren't, all, perfectly standalone containers, but context isn't really about your social relationships. Context is about the ideas that you have about the bigger world around you. And so if you think about faith or religion or spirituality, I think that's the one that would come to mind for most people. And religions are effectively very elaborate stories that connect many dots into a coherent narrative that make our lives make a lot of sense. And so, there's a lot of religions out there, a lot of stories, and people buy into different ones. And we feel really good about that. There's plenty of research actually to show that religious or devout individuals have a greater sense of happiness or well-being because the world makes sense to them.
Right.
Conversely, when you don't have a story that helps you, that you feel good about, and that is coherent, then your sense of well-being is lower. And so, religion's the big one, the really big one. Place is another one. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. I've lived in Chicago now for 30 plus years, but I'm still a Steelers fan and will be till the day I die, and very happy that my sons are Steelers fans. And I hope that their kids are Steelers fans. And there's a certain set of memories about growing up there that I cherish. And anybody could have their own story about their hometown or their state or their region or their country. There's other things like, love of the world, love of the environment. A lot of people globally, they gain meaning from having a sense that they are attached to the natural world and to some extent are responsible for protecting it. That's another idea that would fall under the context umbrella. All of these, Andrew, boil down to, in my day-to-day life, what is meaningful to me, what drives purpose when I think about me being significant as someone on this planet, if only for a brief moment. Where do I derive that significance?
Brian, we're a little low on time, and I would be terrible if I didn't address the issue of money. You
Yes.
study the relationship of people and money. I'm a financial advisor. There's a facile saying, money doesn't buy happiness, but we all seem to be quite quite enamored with it. Your thoughts on money and happiness. And I know it's complicated, and this might take up the rest of our conversation here, but we've all seen, and certainly in the divorce world, I've seen plenty of people with lots of money who are miserable. Having said that, I'm glad that I have a roof over my head, and I'm able to feed my family, and maybe that comes into what we're talking, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. What are your thoughts on the question of money and happiness? Because I know you address quite a bit of text in your process.
The entire book is about that topic. So it's I've come to believe after so I wrote the book 5-6 years ago and built a business on the back of thinking about money and meaning, and I actually think it's a little less complicated than we might suppose. I mean, you use the old line, money doesn't buy happiness, but it sort of does. There's a chapter in the book called Yes, No, Maybe, Not Really, or something like that, which is sort of the true, convoluted but true answer to the question. We really want to go back to, number one, the distinction between rich versus wealthy. Rich is having more. Psychologically, the quest for more is not particularly satisfying, which is why you can see people who have $1, $5, $10, $50, $100 million not be particularly happy, because there's elements of social comparison to others, comparison to where you think you should be. Wealthy, the ability to afford a meaningful life. And now that we've done the 4 C's, it's really the ability to afford or to invest in those 4 sources of contentment. Experience versus reflective happiness, basically the day-to-day good mood, bad mood, versus that deeper sense of leading a meaningful life. The relationship between more money and more experienced happiness is not particularly strong. If you're at the point in your life where you have, say, a middle-class income and you don't have to worry about food or shelter or safety, more money does not increase your daily happiness, the so-called experienced happiness. There's a more complicated and possibly positive relationship between more money and more reflective happiness, sort of conditional to whether you have thought about what really drives that deeper source of contentment and then can invest in those things. So if you feel a deep connection to community, as we've talked about in a few different ways, and to others and to community, to be able to spend more is a good thing. And so there's a case where money does buy happiness. If you want kind of comfort and independence and freedom, and you value that, money buys that too. So again, money buys happiness. If you want to, have flow experiences and have that deeper sense of competence that we talked about, there are ways to invest in that also. So when anyone asks the question, does money buy happiness? The answer is really yes, no, maybe. The answer is it depends, and it's facile to say no, it doesn't buy happiness. It actually does. You just have to know how to spend it.
There's an element of diminishing returns. You mentioned a healthy middle class income, which can help you meet life's basic needs. But after that, I suppose, as you said, if that extra money can help you do good things and channel that money into things that's your 4 C's, then more money is going to be giving you more happiness.
Yeah. So, I'll give you a brief example. So there's a lot of research that shows that when you distinguish between material goods and experiences, purchases of material goods tend to increase happiness less than purchases of experiences. You're a traveler. I love to travel as well. You think about travel as one of the sort of hallmark experiences that we purchase. Well, you can actually take that word experience and break it down into it resonating with our 4C framework. In particular, I took a wonderful family trip got 3 kids, family trip, my wife and kids and I to Europe this summer. Yes, I enjoyed going to the Roman Colosseum and to the Amalfi Coast, and it was really beautiful. But what I really enjoyed was doing it with the people I love. So back to our 4 C's. What's the number 1 C? It's connection. It's that sense of belonging. Could I be with them here at home in Chicago on the couch watching Netflix for a lot less money? Yes. But there's also something really gratifying about being on the road together and having that connection channel through experiences. So there are smarter and less smart ways to spend money to purchase happiness, and a little bit of thought goes a long way for people when they want to align money with meaning.
Brian, last question. A question a lot of people ask me as a financial advisor, and you address this question in your book. Am I going to be okay? I suspect that the answer to that question requires a lot more reflection than financial advisors or the financial services industry would typically provide. How would you, if you were a financial advisor or you knew someone who was asking this question, am I going to be okay? How would you address that to them?
Yeah. First off, just by way of preface, the company that I built and run called Shaping Wealth, this is what we do. We train financial advisors to have deeper conversations about the 2 big questions, which are, am I going to be okay? And number 2, how much is enough? The thing is about those 2 questions is they map perfectly to kind of our evolution as human beings. Survive and thrive, survive, then thrive. So what's really important at the beginning of this conversation, Andrew, and we're always sort of coming back to the beginning of this conversation, is to sort of validate how normal and pervasive the question is. There's really no one out there who isn't, in some sense, wondering, am I going to be okay, both physically and psychologically? So, our physical safety, I don't think either of us is worried about, lunch or dinner today. I think we're going to be okay. I think we're going to be well fed. But deeper matters of psychological safety, will people love me? Am I going to remain connected to the people I care about? Are they going to want to remain connected to me? These are deep, ongoing issues that we all have, in our minds in one way or another. So the am I going to be okay question, I guess, for the purposes of today's relatively brief conversation, it's a matter of validation. It's a matter of advisors giving clients permission to talk about these deeper issues, and then secondly, validating that this is normal. One of the rules that we have at Shaping Wealth is that no one is ever allowed to use the word rational or irrational. Everything in our lives is rational once you understand where somebody's coming from. It doesn't mean that they're not making a bad decision or misunderstands the situation, but it's really important to acknowledge how normal it is to worry about this am I going to be okay question. And that tends to bleed not only into ourselves, but my partner, my kids, my parents, my neighbors. We worry about these things because, we're good people and we want to lead good lives.
On that note, Brian, thank you very much for joining us today. I do advise all of our listeners, get a copy of Brian's book, The Geometry of Wealth. It discusses all these topics in a much greater depth. And if anybody wants to find out more about you and the work, Brian, is it shapingwealth.com?
Yep. Nice and easy. Shapingwealth.com.
Excellent. Brian, thanks very much.
You bet.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.